Arthur. Welcome to the show.
Shannon, great to be here. I appreciate it.
Great to have you. Just say hello to everyone listening and let them know who you are and what you do.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody listening. My name is Arthur Petropoulos. I'm managing partner here at Hillview Partners. We're a middle market, lower middle market, M&A, and capital advisory firm. Basically, we help companies sell themselves. We help companies secure capital. And our kind of area of expertise are privately held companies owned by families, entrepreneurs, small groups of investors, generating typically 1 to 10 million in profit, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little bigger, but helping people accomplish those objectives, avoiding the pitfalls along the way.
And what got you interested in helping small business owners in this capacity? What about your background or your studies or even your experience lent itself to pursuing this?
Sure. So I grew up, and actually I always found business transactions fascinating. So you'd read in the newspaper of some company buying another company expanding, growing. And, my father used to read history books to me growing up. And I thought that world history didn't make any sense if it wasn't for business, right? Like a lot of these people weren't just kind of, Amerigo Vespucci was selling pickles, right? He wasn't just kind of like traversing the world or whatever in the silk trades and the spice trades. And so in any event, I always found that fascinating. And I always liked the idea of kind of helping people and solving these problems or accomplishing these objectives. I ultimately went to law school because the only people I knew who did it growing up were attorneys. But once I was there, I kind of figured out this whole ecosystem of investment banking, private equity. But that's really it. I think a lot of financial services, yours like mine, are kind of the gears and the oil that lubricates the whole economy. And I think if you're not, the world is built with, we always say painters and carvers, right? So there's people that have brilliant ideas that paint pictures. I was not blessed with the skills to think of brilliant things, but I am and our firm is, I think, uniquely well positioned and good at the carving side of facilitating processes, of kind of narrating things in the right way, getting those objectives. And so I think it's a mixture of interest with aptitude, and there we are here.
I love that. I love the painters and carvers metaphor. I always hear it said as like the visionary and the integrator, but I love that that's a great way to articulate it too. So you mentioned who you typically work with. You mentioned families, entrepreneurs, small businesses. What when they come to you, right? When they say, "Hey, Arthur, I'm looking at possibly selling my business, or I'm even coming up with the idea that this is a possibility for my business," where are they at? What is interesting to them about selling the business, or what's triggering them to talk to you?
Sure. So I think business, and just like our personal lives, has seasons in it, right? And there's certain seasons at which I think someone could be obsessed with their business, right? And I think the only way to be good at a business is to be obsessed with it, because if you're not, someone else will be. And so I think when people reach the end of certain seasons where perhaps they're less obsessed, perhaps they're more obsessed with something else. Maybe they want to get bigger, they want to do something different, they want to, I think, convey this to someone else for them to take it to the next level. But I think it's an inflection point that triggers the desire to have the conversation. And sometimes that inflection point is triggered by someone else reaching out to them. So you'll have, a private equity firm or a capital provider reach out to them and say, "Hi, we'd like to buy your company. Hi, we'd like to provide you with debt or equity." And they say, "Well, if one person would like to do this, I have to believe there are many people that would like to do this. How do I evaluate that? How do I analyze and look at what the best option might be?" So it's usually an inflection point of life, whether triggered from outside or internally, that someone says, "I'd really like to have a chat on this and understand what the different potential paths forward could be."
And around when do you think, if you had to give some advice to those listening who are thinking, I haven't even thought about selling my business, but maybe I should just better understand the process or better understand what makes my business sellable. What advice would you have for them on when to engage someone like you to have that conversation?
I mean, look, we like to be a resource, right? The joke about investment bankers or advisors is they always say it's like asking a barber if you need a haircut or asking a bartender if you need a drink, right? And we don't want to be where it's purely transactional, where someone says like, "Should I sell?" Yes, 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 right? "Should I do this now?" Of course, right? We like to be, I think, thoughtful in the sense of, it's not always the perfect time to do these things, but it's always the right time, to your point, to build towards a company that is sellable. So from our perspective, we like being a resource to companies. And so we chat with people who are 1 year, 3 years, 5 years out from doing it, because I do think that if you can be deliberate in building a company that is sellable, then it's far less things that you have to kind of jerry rig at the last moment or kind of reconfigure or try to fix, right? If you can just build it intentionally the right way. And so we say to people, I know we chatted kind of before we got on here, is that all businesses trade hands at some point. Now, whether it's to shutting down, whether it's to the next generation, whether it's to another buyer, whoever it may be, ultimately, by virtue of our finite existence here, it does go to someone else. And therefore, I think starting from the beginning or as early as you possibly can of saying, I'm going to build this business to be, yes, profitable, yes, fulfilling in the objectives you're looking to accomplish with the business, personally and otherwise, but also in that it is transferable and sellable in whatever shape, form, or fashion that ultimately takes.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, what I want to hear what makes a business sellable? What makes a business attractive to a buyer where those listening can say, "Oh, I can work on these things in the meantime until I decide what direction I want to take."
Sure. So we always kind of define it. I think Marcus Lemonis said it, and it was a great framework where he said, people, process, product. And so if we say a business, if you should think of a business as a machine, right? It's like one of those old Rube Goldberg kind of comics of a bunch of gears and levers and pulleys and whatnot. But if you can define within a business what are the processes that are repeatable, that are reliable, and so how does business originate or source business? How does it execute on the business and fulfill what it's supposed to do? And then how does it, I think, manage the operations relative to that? So financial, people, things like that. And that's kind of on the process side. If on the people side, you want to have people that, yes, are, I believe, trained across different sectors, but where each person is doing definable things and such that if someone leaves or departs for some reason, that they can be replaced, that what they do is definable, and that there are some safeguards along the way. And then ultimately, I think the product, the service, the offering, that is very well defined, whether there's tiers or brackets or different subscription categories or whatever it might be. But if you can define those three main pillars, that makes your business sellable. So we always say, write this down. Guy told me once, you don't understand anything really well that you can't write down simply. And so I'd say take 3 pieces of paper, make one process, one people, one product or offering, and define each one. And wherever it's kind of turns into gobbledygook, or where you start to say like, oh, it's kind of this and it's kind of that, that's your areas to kind of, I think, optimize or improve. And so there's other ways, as you kind of scale the business and whatnot, other things to contemplate. But fundamentally, it's those 3 pillars or categories that really, I think, make a business sellable and make it such that you could communicate or actually narrate what it is that you have and what its capabilities and, I think, potential is.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to necessarily be perfect in all 3 categories, right? But there are definitely some optimal conditions, if you will, or optimal ways to create a solid, process, people, product dimension of your business. What are some tips you have based on maybe mistakes made by past clients or what you've seen in the industries that you've worked with? What are some ways that people maybe were unprepared for,
Sure.
they wanted to sell their business, but their business wasn't super prepared? What are some of the characteristics of businesses that you've seen that had to improve these things?
Sure. So I think it goes into when you think of kind of seasons of the business again, is that there's different junctures and there's different kind of hurdles that require different, I believe, types of behavior. So we always say like making a first dollar for a business is like Prometheus starting fire, right? It's magic. It's like, oh my gosh, someone wants to buy this thing, right? And so then once you sell one widget, you say, how do I sell more widgets, right? And so maybe that gets a business from $0 to $100,000 of profitability. And then you say, that's kind of proof of concept. You've defined the product, service, or offering. Maybe you've broken it into some tiers, some layers, some levels, whatever it might be, but you can kind of define what it is that you do or offer. And then I think from that 100,000 to a million mark is iterations. It's growing. It's just, how do we do more of this? I want to sell more widgets and sell, provide more services. But I do think the million mark is oftentimes this interesting place where it almost necessitates a few steps back to take a few steps forward. And that's where the pain point can be. I've seen people who run a business almost entirely themselves, and maybe they make $2 million a year, but it's not a sellable business because they're doing an ungodly amount of things. And they're making a lot of money, but that difference, and I think it's kind of the Alex Hormozy quote, right? What's the difference between being rich and being wealthy is the difference between what you earn and what you own, right? So if you want to turn a business into an ownable asset, that's the step usually at that million-ish mark that you need to take a step back and you have to start implementing these processes and you have to start disaggregating the processes of the business so that you can delegate some of the work such that, you can the concept that you have to be entirely passive in a business at anything less than $10 million of profit, I think is a falsity, because it does need your touch in it, right? It does need your activity, but it doesn't need you working 200 hours a week. And so I think as you kind of disaggregate the processes, you keep saying like, okay, of the 10 things that I do, what are the things I like least? And start delegating into definable roles. And again, that bleeds into the people part of it. And then ultimately you boil yourself back down to just one person in the company doing one job, and whether you're really excellent at sales, operations, financial, capital, whatever it might be. But I think that's the pain point. So when we see people try to reach beyond that million mark without implementing processes, without implementing the people, usually they have their product pretty well defined at that juncture, but it's the other parts of it that can become a constraint. And so we always say that's the step back to make a step forward juncture. And I think some people try to blow past it, ourselves included, right? I think everybody, it's their natural instinct of just, what was the Howard Hughes quote? How much is enough? Just a little bit more, right? But you do have to be, I think, take a very analytical look at a certain juncture to say, how do we build this for further scale and for the long-term enterprise value creation?
Yeah, and I think that when you hit that juncture, like you said, right, you're at $1 million in profit, let's say, and now you realize how much you have to delegate. Now you're investing in that. Now you're having to build the systems and build the process and build the handbooks and hire the employees, pay the payroll, pay the taxes. Like there's a lot of other intricacies that come in now and complexities that get added in that, doesn't make your business less attractive to be sold. But now you are in a position where you're like, well, crap, now I have to invest all this other money into making my business sellable. And now I'm not at the profit level I was at. So it kind of can be that converging or contrasting factors where, hey, I thought I had to like maximize profit to be sellable,
right,
but without the systems in place, maybe not. So it kind of goes back and forth, right? You want to have a high profit margin while also having some efficient processes.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a wise way to look at it. And I just, it gets back to the point that you have to build a business that you have to think on 100-year scale of a business, even if your intention is not to hold it for that long, or even if you're not ultimately going to have it for that long, it still has to be done with that thought, right? And that's always kind of the bane of the public company, is that they must be profitable every quarter. It must get better every quarter. But the nice thing about private companies, smaller middle market, lower middle market businesses, is that you can be thoughtful. And so you can eat a little bit of profit to implement the processes. And I think there's an ego test there, right? Because if all of a sudden one year you're rocking and rolling and you're the guy getting the house in the Hamptons for the summer, and then the next year you say, I really got to plow this money back into processes, there's I think you have to be comfortable with that, and you have to be very long-term viewed in the way you look at the business.
Yeah, and exactly. I totally agree. And I think that we saw that too with everything that happened with COVID from two different perspectives. One was people who thought they were unstoppable, and then that hit. And it was kind of was the Warren Buffett quote that you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide runs out.
Yes, that's a great quote.
And then you realized who was kind of faking it till they make it, or who was kind of riding the tide of the economy and didn't really have a sustainable business. But also this wave brought in a lot of business owners who went virtual, left their company, started their own thing. And they're also going, hey, this is actually a lot of work to build a business. And you also have that wave of folks who are going, you know what? I really was riding high. I built a 7-figure business in 2020, 2021. And I've noticed this with, folks I've worked with. And then 2022 came along and it kind of regulated back to, people weren't, going through the pandemic anymore. And it started to kind of even itself out and regulate itself. And now 2022, 2023, those 7-figure business owners who thought they were unstoppable and, oh, this is just the norm now. Like I just make this much money now. When that first lull hit of, okay, like maybe this was kind of a trend and I rode that trend for a second. And now, oh, wait a minute, it's not super consistent. So you bring up a good point there to say, how reliable is your revenue? Because you could have gotten quote unquote lucky. And by that, I mean, had external factors impact your revenue as opposed to it being a reflection of your business itself.
I think that's a great way of kind of characterizing it. And that's what we say in business, is that anybody can, if you can do something once, you're very fortunate. But as they say, a fool and their money are soon parted. And so it's the ability to replicate. It's the ability to create a consistency, a reliability of things that ultimately creates value in a business. Because, if you're I don't know how to say it. Like, right. Like if you could beat, Michael Jordan in a one-on-one game, you might be lucky, but if you can beat everybody over a long period of time, well, you're just that person, right? You're just that, and that's what we say in business. And I think sometimes that's the terrifying thing of it, right? Because, there was the guy who wrote all the songs for the Beach Boys, this guy, Brian Wilson, and he had said his scariest moments in life were when he would sit down at the piano to write the next song, because he'd start to question, do I have this? Was I just lucky? Was that a fluke? Was I just on a hot streak? Where's the next thing going to come from? And so as a business owner, it can be terrifying too, to say, oh no, do we really have it? Are we really capable of it? But it's, when things get hard, that's why most people quit. And that's why if you push through it, you're one of the elite, at the higher end where, you pushed through it. And so I agree. I think it's how do you make things replicatable and then also adaptable, right? That kind of Darwinian concept of you've got to make a business that's all season, right? So good times, bad times, how do you survive and how do you do well, kind of irrespective of the outside forces? Because a lot of people can make money on you saw from all the crypto stuff, and I every time I make opinions on crypto, I get bashed by people. But so I'm not opining one way or the other, but I will say people got very fortunate, if not lucky, on some of that. And if you can't repeat it, well, you're a bit of a one-trick pony. So I agree with all of what you just said there in the sentiment.
Yeah, exactly. And I have the same kind of feeling with crypto. And again, not bashing crypto, but I always say, if you are, was it my mentor Mel says, building wealth shouldn't be an adrenaline rush. That's what he said.
Yes.
So you should not be building wealth using adrenaline. Like, it shouldn't be that quick. It shouldn't be that, that's fun to play with, but that's not real wealth building. Is much more boring than that. So.
And that's a phenomenal quote. I'm going to use that on every podcast I go on from now on. But,
all right. Credit Mel Abraham if he's listening, because he listens to the show.
The proper citation. But you're right, because I think in the beginning and at the end, it's very exciting, right? When you start a business, you get to tell everybody about it. You buy in, a domain, you got pictures, this and that. And then when you're selling a business, it's exciting. It makes noise. Everyone thinks, they say it takes 20 years to be an overnight success. But in the middle of that is dark and gritty and repetitive and mundane and self-questioning and very solitary in many ways. And that's why, it's important if people can have resources like yourself to kind of help them along the way, but it's not pretty. And that's why I think a lot of people kind of get caught on the front end of it. I want to, because it's exciting to talk about, but the actual work, you're right. It's more or less, I think more so than running off adrenaline. It's, can you do the things that need to be done irrespective of how you feel? Right. And that's the key thing.
Absolutely.
With business, right? That, because people say like, wow, Arthur, like you get up every single day and you just keep grinding away. I wish I wanted to do that. And I said, yeah, me too. Right. Like that's always,
I don't want to, I just do it.
Right. Like you just have to be able to execute irrespective of if you wake up and you feel sad or you feel tired or you do this or you do that.
Yeah.
So I agree. That's where businesses are really made.
Exactly. I want to thank my mom for making me go to summer camp and swimming lessons and making me do all that stuff I hated, because it was like, well, we just have to do this. This is a requirement of society. Like, this is just what you have to do. And that builds discipline. I totally agree. But I want to talk about, for those listening who are, we've talked about selling a business or exiting. I want to know what options there are for exits, because I think people are very limited in how they view this, where they say, I can just sell my business to a buyer. That's all I really understand, or I close the doors. Like, there's so many other options. Can you just kind of go through, some creative other ways that you could exit your business or become less involved in your business that may not involve completely selling it and stepping away?
Yes. And this is part of every conversation we have with people, is that we like to think of call it strategic opportunities, right? Things you can do with your business much more as a spectrum or a continuum than a binary option. So I think people are kind of familiar with, I could borrow money as debt and then keep all of the equity, or I could sell all of the equity. And those are kind of the only options. But in between that, there's kind of strategic debt that will take a small equity piece of the business, kind of like call it a structured debt with warrants, mezzanine debt. Then there's preferred equity, which is kind of like a different type of equity that has a little bit of a debt component. And then there's different types of sales. You could sell a third of your business. You could sell 49%. You could sell 51%. You could sell 80% and have an equity rollover. So the point being is, what we like to start the conversations with, because sometimes people come in with a preconceived notion of like, I want to sell or I want debt. And we like to say, well, let's talk about the objectives. Let's kind of crystallize where the business is and where you are now, and where do you want the business to be and where do you want to be? And then let's kind of back into what the different options are and what the different solutions could be. Because to your point, there's a lot of optionality depending on, I think, how long they want to be around, what type of person they want to partner with or have involved. Sometimes people say, I have the plan. I know what I want to do. I just need the capital. Other times people say, I don't want capital unless it comes with expertise and relationships and channels that they can help us with. And so I think understanding the objectives, you can back into what it is. But to your initial point, it's much more of a spectrum or a continuum with a lot of different kind of shades of gray between the black and white of selling or just debt.
Yeah, and let's talk about the other things, which are mergers and acquisitions, which is M&A. For those who don't know, that's what Arthur was
Sure.
mentioning he works in. Mergers and acquisitions. What's the difference between these? Because I admit I have probably used the wrong one to describe something at one point in time. But also, how can they be applied for a small business owner too in this kind of spectrum of options?
Sure. So, yeah, I apologize. Us arrogant bankers use acronyms wherever we can. But I would say you think of M&A or mergers and acquisitions kind of colloquially just covers the whole spectrum of, selling businesses, buying businesses, and merging businesses. And so really, we tend to think of a merger by its true definition is kind of the fusing of two companies. And so a strategic merger would be, a vacuum cleaner manufacturing company merges with a vacuum cleaning services and cleaning company and they combine, or, software for Windows merges with a company that's software for doors and hardware, or whatever it might be. And so mergers tend to be kind of the combination of equals. Now, in reality, there is usually the acquirer and the seller. So even when things are sometimes characterized as mergers, they're more accurately an acquisition by somebody. And so you think of an acquisition, it's just the act of a company buying another company. When you think of a merger, it's supposed to be the combination of equals. But a lot of times, I guess, from a characterization perspective, a merger is somewhat optimal for characterization because let's say two companies are merging, they're privately held companies, or one's buying the other. You don't really want to characterize it that one is buying out the other person and pushing them out, right? Because let's say it's a HVAC services company that's national buying an HVAC services company that's very regional. That regional company is going to have all of the goodwill, the community relationships. And so if the characterization is that megacorp just acquired, bought and pillaged, a small company, then the customers are going to say, hey, you know what, do I really, it's not my old friend Frank who runs the company, do I really want to be part of it? And so the characterization as a strategic merger, and we're keeping private how much of the company someone bought, how much is not bought, how long people are going to stick around. Like if the narrative really helps to keep the continuity. So in any event, I think that's why kind of M&A or mergers and acquisitions is kind of more broadly spoken, but you can really think of it as either you're selling a company, two things equal are combining, or you're buying a company. And that's kind of a lot of little things in between, but those are the kind of the general three elements.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, what came to my mind is like, well, does someone have brand dominance?
Right.
Right? Like it's almost, is there a dominance of one brand over the other? So if I sold my accounting firm to like a McGladrey, like is it now referred to as McGladrey, the local edition, or is it still, keep what you earn company, but behind the scenes they're operating it, right? So it's a little bit more of that brand recognition and how that's going to be portrayed by the customer. It's interesting because I didn't even know that. It's like kind of more of how it's perceived as a deal than the actual intricate parts of the deal itself.
Well, if you think about it at some level, like when an end customer gets the same service, if they find out that the company was sold 2 years ago, but they continued to receive the service, they'll say, well, hey, nothing changed. But if you deliberately say to them, like, I'm selling my business, on this date, it will change. They're going to be looking for what's the difference. They're going to be, maybe they want to
Yeah.
renegotiate a contract. There's a lot of different things, but I think you're right. And that branding thing also has lots of options because we've seen companies that sell and it'll be, ABC company and XYZ company, or powered by or supported by, right? To give you a
Right.
funny story, uh, I worked in New York in the kind of the internal private equity group of Cantor Fitzgerald, and its affiliate was BGC Partners. But we were buying and consolidating real estate services companies. So we had bought Newmark Knight Frank in New York. We bought Grubb and Ellis. That was another big company. And then we went around the country kind of aggregating. But every time we bought another company, the name would slightly change. And so it started off as Newmark Knight Frank, and then it became Newmark Grubb Knight Frank. And we actually had sponsored the US Open. We put a few different ads out there. And I don't know if it was intentional. I never really got to the bottom, but our name appeared as two different names at the same event because of how many different things we're buying and getting pushed together. And so someone actually asked us to say, I saw your name as two different things at the event. And we were just told, like, the answer is we were testing different things to see what receptivity would be. But in reality, so now the company goes by Newmark, right? And that's it. But I think that's a challenging thing along the way. Is a lot of times you'll see it almost sequenced, where if you were acquired, your company will stay exactly what it is for a year. Then years 2 to 3, it will be your name, powered by, supported by a XYZ company. And then after that, either you get an initial in the mega company's acronym or else. But it's a negotiated thing too, because there are some companies that say, that's what Berkshire Hathaway had a lot of success by saying, we'll never change the name of the company. It's always going to be what you call it. And some people, that's an important thing too. So that's an interesting element and more negotiated than you'd think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's a ton of value in the name and the brand recognition. That is a ton of goodwill that goes into the assets. So I think that's totally true. Arthur, what recommendations do you have if someone is saying, okay, I am contemplating the idea of an exit or just trying to plan for my future of my business and want to talk to a resource? As you said, what are the best people to assemble on your team of advisors that can help you make this decision, even down to when you're looking at a deal? Who do you need to have in the room to advise you?
Sure. So I think it's very important. We come in at a certain juncture when these things are being contemplated, but along the way, the people that are going to be more involved on a day-to-day basis, largely it's going to be a CPA or your accountant, and whether that's internal or external. But I think that person can really help you understand the financial metrics of the business. And so anytime you're trying to sell a business, we always say it sells on three main things. It's going to sell on the fundamentals of the financials. It's going to sell on the access you have to particular end clients or user bases. And it's going to sell on your proprietary capabilities or what special sauce, whatever your aptitude is that nobody else has. But when it comes to the financial part, that's going to be the part that you're kind of tracking probably most closely along the way. And being able to characterize how trailing 12-month profitability has been, how gross margins have improved, how operating expenses have indicated there's leverage where they stay the same even though revenue goes up, how EBITDA or profit growth has been. And so we always say you can only improve what you can measure. And I think a CPA or an accountant is going to be your best ally in being able to measure the progress from a fundamental and financial perspective of the business along the way. I think second to that, is kind of who comes in, as the progression of the business is having a good attorney that understands business and understands the nuances of business, so that when you're getting, because inevitably as you're running a business, you'll get pelted with offers for capital for this and that. And oftentimes, sometimes if someone works with us earlier in the process, we'll help vet and kind of process those. But oftentimes that'll be an attorney just taking a peek, having a resource, understanding, because all business is contractually driven and all business is about the allocation of risk. You're paying me and there's some risk someone's taking somewhere, and that allocation of risk is dictated in the agreements. And so having an attorney who can really understand the allocation of risk is valuable. And then I think rounding that out is someone like us who I think understands kind of the strategic objectives on a forward-looking basis, where everybody can contribute to that, but that's really the swimming pool we swim in all day. What does capital look like? What do valuations look like? How are things transacting? Who's buying? Who's selling? How does that work? But that's kind of the market we work in. So we always say, as you start a business, when you start, it's going to be, you and God. As you progress, you find a good accountant, have a good attorney, and ultimately find a good advisor, kind of investment banking, M&A, strategic advisor. Almost like, very big companies have kind of corporate development officers is the phrase that they'll use. And they're kind of helping executives with strategy, with capital, with acquisitions, M&A type stuff. And so if you can have that, we think of ourselves, yes, we do the transactional stuff, but as a fractional component of that as well, just as a resource. So that's always, I think, kind of how the team functions, in addition to obviously having great teammates internally of kind of the C-suite and employees.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it may sound like a lot, guys, to have to assemble this whole team of Avengers around your business. But what it comes down to is, like you said, and here's the thing I see a lot is these transactions are happening with friends, with colleagues, right? So
Yeah.
another business is looking to acquire you, but you know the owner because they're in the same industry, in the same geographic area. And you're thinking, oh, well, like gentlemen's agreements and things like that.
Yeah.
Or you're thinking, oh, well, like they wouldn't try to screw me. You know, I don't need a lawyer to look at the contract. We're cool. And it's always, I always say, it's always best, like, even when you don't think you need one, have
Yes.
somebody look it over, have somebody poke holes in it, ask the right questions, and be able to say, hey, well, what if this happens? Or what if this happens? Are you protected? Because, you know, it's a big commitment. Like selling your business is a really big move, and you want to be taking it seriously and not be cutting any corners, in my opinion.
No, I think you're totally right there. I think it was John Rockefeller who said that business friends from business turns out better than business from friends. And so, and the expression we always use is we say, in God we trust, everybody else signs something. And so, if for the avoidance of doubt, if for belts and suspenders, if for measure twice, cut once, whatever the phrase you want to use, it's always prudent to do that. And everybody will understand that. To say, listen, because you're diplomatic. I don't think anyone should be Attila the Hun pounding the table saying, sign this, sign this. But you just say, listen, there's some chance, God forbid something happens to me. What if, there has to be documentation around things in order to substantiate what we've agreed upon. And we're going to do it amicably and in a nice way, but it's important to do it. And so, I understand that things can be done on a handshake, and that's okay if on the spirit or the principle of the deal, it's done that way, but then it does need to be documented the right way because, in good times, everybody's friends, and bad times, you still have some friends, just less of them, and important to kind of safeguard against that.
Completely agree. So, Arthur, how can folks who are listening find out more about working with your team if this is something they're considering?
Sure. So our website is hillviewps.com. So Hillview, P's and Peter, S's and Sam.com. There's something there to reach out to us on the site. And then also, we're on LinkedIn, both me personally and the company page. We do a lot. We're always interacting with people, always talking to people. We're super responsive. So if anybody has of interest to just even have a preliminary chat, because I think it can be somewhat intimidating that they're going to get on the phone, they're going to get drilled about their numbers. Then I'm going to say, what do you mean you don't want to sell your business right now? Right. But that's not the case. We're always happy to chat, point people in the right direction. And I will say, as a resource for some content, we put out videos twice a week on LinkedIn on our company page. But if anyone doesn't want to or doesn't feel like logging in, we repost all the videos on YouTube as well under my name, Arthur Petropoulos. So it's there. We try to cover kind of like the FAQ. So every time we're having calls or conversations and the same topics come up, we say, okay, let's make a quick 5-minute blurb on this because it at least gives some kind of a precursor for some of this. But yeah, we're in the jungle all day, so always happy to chat with people in whatever form's best for them.
Perfect. So if you're listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube, check out their YouTube channel, check out LinkedIn to learn more from Arthur and his team. And of course, check out the link in the show notes if you're interested in working with them. Arthur, thank you so much for jumping on the show today.
I appreciate it, Shane. You have great content here. I'm glad to be a guest, and I look forward to the next one.